Most systems survive for one simple reason. People follow the rules. They stay inside the lines. They don't ask the wrong questions. That night, I didn't. And sometimes, one decision is enough to break everything. The first thing that changed wasn't pressure, it was timing. For days, maybe weeks, though time had stopped behaving normally, the system had responded within predictable windows. Messages arrived after pauses calibrated just long enough to unsettle, but not enough to lose control. Silences had weight, but they followed rules. This morning, the rule broke. I woke before the alarm, not because of a sound, but because of absence. The city outside my window felt misaligned, like a recording that had slipped a fraction of a second out of sync. Cars passed, but not when I expected them to. Voices drifted up from the street, but the rhythm was wrong. I lay still, listening. Nothing pressed back, no faint awareness, no sense of being measured. That should have scared me. Instead, it focused me. I didn't reach for my phone right away. I let my breathing settle, counting the way I'd learned as a child, when nights felt too large and questions had no names yet. In for 4, hold, out for 6. The system hadn't withdrawn, it had delayed. Delay, I was learning, meant preparation. I stood and moved through the apartment quietly, careful not to introduce noise of my own too early. I made coffee. I opened the window. I watched the city wake in uneven fragments, like a machine running through a soft reset. Only then did I check my phone. No notifications, no missed calls, no warnings disguised as concern. That was the first open door, not literal, structural. The system wasn't reacting to me anymore. It was repositioning. I dressed and left the apartment without looking back, letting the door close behind me with a soft, unremarkable click. Outside, the air felt sharper than usual, as if a storm had passed without rain. I walked a few blocks before stopping, watching reflections slide across the darkened windows of parked cars. Nothing followed. No buzz, no correction. I smiled faintly. This was escalation. Not louder, wider. I took the train instead of driving. Another deviation, not dramatic enough to flag on its own, but different enough to matter in sequence. I stood among strangers, their faces half-lit by screens, their expressions folded inward, private. Systems love crowds. Crowds generate averages. I wanted to see if the system still preferred me isolated. The train rattled forward. Stations passed. People got on, got off. Life moved with careless momentum. Still nothing. I checked the time. Too quiet for too long. When my phone finally vibrated, it startled me, not because I'd forgotten it was there, but because the timing was wrong. Too late, too exposed, unknown sender. One line, you're outside established parameters. I read it twice. Not behavior, not activity, parameters. That meant rules had been redefined. I didn't reply. The train slowed. Doors opened. I stepped out with the crowd and let it carry me up the stairs and onto the street. The city here felt different, newer, glass and steel in motion designed to look efficient. Places like this loved being mapped, loved being quantified. I walked until my legs started to ache, then turned down a quieter side street and sat on a concrete step outside a closed storefront. I watched my reflection distort in the darkened glass. "You're not used to this part," I whispered. The system didn't answer. That silence was different from before, not restraint. Observation had moved elsewhere. I felt it then, not pressure, but displacement, like standing in a room after someone had quietly moved the furniture. The space was the same, but the pads through it had changed. My phone buzzed again. We're initiating a corrective sequence. There it was. Not containment, not recommendation, correction. This was the shift Evan had warned me about. I typed one word, define. The response came faster than expected. Exposure control. I exhaled slowly. Exposure wasn't about being seen. It was about who saw whom first. I stood and walked again, letting my pace remain unhurried. If they were escalating, I needed to stay boring on the surface. Escalation punishes reaction. It feeds on it. I felt my phone vibrate again. This time it wasn't a message. It was a notification, a calendar alert. Not one I'd created. A meeting reminder. No title, no location, just a time. 30 minutes from now. My chest tightened. That was new. Not communication, coordination. I stared at the alert, pulse steady, mind racing. This wasn't a request. It was an assumption. They weren't asking me to show up. They were acting as if I already had. I canceled it. Immediately another notification appeared. Same time, same blank title. I canceled it again. This time it stayed gone, for now. I laughed quietly. Okay, I said under my breath. Now we're talking. I changed direction, heading back toward the train station. Not because I wanted to leave, but because I wanted to create conflict between expected trajectory and actual movement. The phone buzzed again. Deviation acknowledged. That phrasing was tight, controlled. They weren't pretending not to notice anymore. I boarded the next train without checking where it was headed. Movement first, explanation later. As the train pulled away, I felt the pressure return, not around me but ahead of me. Like a narrowing corridor I hadn't reached yet. I thought about Evan, about my mother, about all the adjacent nodes they'd named without naming. This was the moment they would test whether escalation worked better than silence, whether I'd fold when uncertainty became logistical. My phone buzzed again. This will simplify matters. I closed my eyes. That sentence told me everything. Simplification meant fewer variables. Fewer variables meant exclusion. I typed one final response before putting the phone away. Simplification always breaks something. The reply came after a longer pause than I expected. Long enough to feel like calculation. We're prepared for loss. That was the line, the one that crossed from system logic into something colder. I opened my eyes and watched the city blur past the window, knowing that whatever door had opened this morning wouldn't close again. Episode 6 had begun not with pursuit, but with assumption. An assumption once challenged has only two outcomes: retreat or force. As the train carried me deeper into the city, I understood the new rhythm clearly for the first time. The system wasn't trying to contain me anymore. It was trying to decide whether I was worth the disruption I caused. The train didn't slow where I expected it to. That was the first tell. I'd ridden this line enough times to know the rhythm. Where the brakes usually sighed, where the lights dimmed for a second longer than necessary. Today, the deceleration came late, abrupt enough to jolt a few people out of their screens. A man cursed under his breath. Someone laughed nervously. The system had touched something physical. Not me, the environment. I stayed seated, eyes forward, breathing steady. Escalation thrives on reaction. It wants flinches. It wants tells. The doors opened. A wave of people surged out. Then another pressed in. I let myself be carried with them onto the platform, then stepped aside, creating a pocket of stillness near a pillar where the noise thinned. My phone vibrated, not a buzz, a ring, an actual incoming call. Unknown number. That hadn't happened before. Messages were clean, traceable, logged. Calls introduced risk, voice, cadence, timing. Calls were intimate. I let it ring once, twice. On the third vibration, I answered. Daniel, a voice said. Not synthetic, not distorted. Human, calm. They hadn't used my name directly before. They'd implied it, circled it, treated me like an index entry. Hearing it spoken landed differently, like a hand placed on the table between us. You're speaking, I said quietly. That's new. A pause, not technical. Human hesitation. We thought it was time, the voice replied. Not I, we, plural still but closer. I leaned my shoulder against the pillar and watched commuters stream past, none of them slowing, none of them looking twice. The world had narrowed to the line between my ear and this voice. You scheduled a meeting, I said, without asking. Another pause. We're past asking, the voice said. That phase didn't produce stability. There it was, direct escalation, no euphemisms, no reframing. I smiled faintly. And this will, I asked. The voice softened, not in tone, but in pacing, like someone choosing their words carefully because they believed I might understand. This will produce clarity. Clarity is what systems reach for when nuance becomes expensive. I stepped away from the pillar and began walking slowly along the platform, letting my movements stay casual. You're assuming I'll participate, I said. You already are, the voice replied. You answered. Fair. Why now, I asked. Why the call? Because indirect measures are no longer efficient, the voice said. Your unpredictability has crossed a threshold. I stopped walking. That was the phrase. Crossed a threshold. Not approaching, not testing. Crossed. And the corrective sequence, I asked. This is it? This is the first step, the voice said. I waited. They filled the silence. We need alignment, the voice continued. Not compliance, alignment. I almost laughed. Alignment was compliance dressed up to sound collaborative. You want me back inside the frame, I said. The voice corrected. Legible, readable, predictable. I felt a flicker of anger then. Not hot, not explosive, but sharp, clean. And if I'm not, I asked. Another pause, longer this time. We proceed, the voice said. With what? I pressed. Restriction, the voice replied. Targeted. My chest tightened, not in fear, but in recognition. This was the line I'd expected eventually. Not collateral, not implication, direct pressure. You said you were prepared for loss, I said. That didn't sound targeted. It isn't, the voice said, from our perspective. There it was, perspective as justification. I started walking again, moving toward the stairs, letting the call continue as if this were an ordinary conversation. The normality was the point. Who are you? I asked. The voice exhaled softly. A representative, they said, one layer closer than before. I pictured a chain, abstraction stacked on abstraction, each layer absorbing risk for the one beneath it. And above you, I asked. Is not relevant, the voice said. Then neither are your demands, I replied. Another pause. I reached the top of the stairs and stepped out into daylight. The city felt brighter here, louder. Buses hissed. Someone shouted into a phone. A vendor dragged a metal cart across the pavement, the sound scraping the air. We're offering a controlled resolution, the voice said, firmer now, one that limits spread. There it is, I said. Spread. You've already acknowledged adjacency, the voice replied. This is mitigation. By threatening restriction, I said. By applying structure, the voice countered. I stopped at the edge of the sidewalk and looked at the traffic streaming past. You're escalating because you can't model me anymore, I said. Not because I'm dangerous. Silence. Real silence. Then the voice spoke again, slower. Danger is defined by effect, not intent. I nodded. Then listen carefully, I said, because here's the effect of this call. I stepped off the curb and crossed the street with the light, moving deliberately, forcing the voice to follow my pace. You've acknowledged me as an actor, I continued, not an anomaly, not a data point. That was inevitable, the voice said. No, I replied, it was avoidable. You chose speed over subtlety. Another pause. I could almost hear the recalculation. You're misinterpreting leverage, the voice said. This call is an opportunity. For what? I asked. To conclude this, the voice said, cleanly. Clean conclusions require asymmetry. You want terms, I said. State them. The voice didn't hesitate this time. Cease engagement with external analysts, they said. Evan. Limit deviation, they continued. Return to predictable routines. And the collateral, I asked. Will stabilize, the voice said. I laughed then. Not loudly, not mockingly, just enough to let them hear it. You don't stabilize people, I said. You suppress signals. Another silence. If you refuse, the voice said, we escalate. There it is, I said softly, direct, finally. I stopped walking and stood still in the middle of the sidewalk, people flowing around me like water around a rock. Then understand this, I said. This call doesn't pressure me. It should, the voice replied. It clarifies you, I said, and clarity works both ways. I could feel the moment stretch, the line taut with consequence. What do you want? The voice asked. Not what will you do, what do you want? That question didn't belong to a system. It belonged to a person inside one. I want you on record, I said, using your voice, naming restriction, acknowledging adjacency. That's not possible, the voice said immediately. Then escalation is already public, I replied. You just haven't realized where yet. Silence, long, then quietly. You're forcing exposure. No, I said. You did, when you called. The line went dead, no goodbye, no warning, just termination. I stood there for a moment, phone still at my ear, listening to nothing. The city rushed around me indifferent. This was the first direct strike, not technical, not subtle, human, and that meant something fundamental had changed. They'd stepped into the open because they believed force would end uncertainty faster than patience. They were wrong, because the moment they spoke, they became reachable. I lowered the phone and slipped it into my pocket, heart steady, mind clear. Episode 6 had crossed its own threshold, not because they escalated, but because they revealed a face behind the frame, and faces can be remembered, tracked, held accountable. As I walked on, blending back into the city, one thought settled with quiet certainty. The system had finally chosen force, which meant it had run out of invisible options. The effects were immediate. Not dramatic, not visible. That was how I knew they were real. After the call ended, I stood where I was for a few seconds longer than necessary, phone still warm in my hand. People brushed past me without slowing, the city swallowing the moment as if nothing unusual had happened. That was the mistake. The system didn't explode, it tightened. I felt it first as resistance, small, almost polite inconveniences stacking up with too much precision to be coincidence. My transit card scanned a fraction of a second slower than usual. The digital billboard across the street glitched, froze, then resumed as I passed beneath it. My phone signal dipped, returned, dipped again. They weren't cutting me off, they were marking the perimeter. I walked without urgency, letting my body remain loose even as my mind sharpened. The call that changed the rules. Before, interaction had been asymmetrical, messages without voices, pressure without presence. Now there was a voice, and a voice implies accountability. I ducked into a public library, not to hide but to anchor myself in a space built for quiet scrutiny. Libraries are strange that way. They invite observation while discouraging interference. Cameras exist, but behavior is expected to be subdued. Systems behave differently in rooms designed for silence. I took a seat at a long table near the back, facing a row of windows streaked with late afternoon light. I didn't open a book. I didn't check my phone. I waited. That was the second escalation, waiting without instruction. My phone buzzed after 7 minutes. Unknown sender. No greeting. The call was a corrective measure. I read it once, then again. Corrective. Not exploratory, not conversational. That was the lie they needed to maintain. I didn't respond. A second message followed. Your reaction will determine next steps. I smiled faintly. You already decided next steps, I whispered. I set the phone face down and stood, walking slowly toward the shelves. I trailed my fingers along the spines of books I'd never read, their titles blurring into texture. History, philosophy, fiction, so many systems documented, so many failures disguised as evolution. When I returned to the table, the phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a message. It was an alert, account access update. No explanation, just a notification. I opened my banking app, still locked. I checked my email. A new message sat at the top of the inbox, flagged as important, from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was empty. I opened it. No body text, just an attachment. A PDF, untitled. My pulse quickened, not from fear but from recognition. This was the move. Artifacts instead of words. Documents instead of dialogue. I downloaded the file and opened it. The first page was blank. The second contained a single line, centered. Engagement with restricted individuals increases exposure risk. I scrolled. The third page listed names. Not many, just enough. My breath caught when I saw Evans. No context, no explanation, just his name, printed cleanly, legible. That was the escalation. Not threat, not harm, enumeration. They were showing me the map, not to scare me but to assert authorship. I closed the file and sat very still, feeling the shape of anger form beneath my ribs. Not explosive, not wild, focused. This was what they meant by proceed. I picked up my phone and typed one sentence. You crossed from correction into coercion. The reply came faster than any before. Your interpretation is noted. Always that word, noted, logged. I typed again. You said the call was corrective. This is leverage. There was a longer pause this time, long enough to feel like the voice was consulting something above it. When the response arrived, it was different. Leverage is an outcome of misalignment. There it was, blame inverted. I closed my eyes. This was the moment where many people would fold, not because they believed the system, but because the system had made resistance feel selfish. Protect yourself, it whispers. Others will stabilize. That was the trap. I stood and left the library without another glance at the shelves, stepping back into the noise of the street. The city felt sharper now, edges more defined, sound carried differently. Every passing face felt like a variable. I didn't call Evan. That would have been predictable. I didn't go home. That would have been isolating. Instead, I walked. Blocks passed. Then more. I needed to disrupt sequence. Sequence was how they exerted pressure. My phone buzzed again. We can remove identifiers. I stopped walking. Remove. Not protect. Not shield. Remove. You're offering erasure, I said quietly. The response came immediately. We're offering safety. Safety framed as absence. No, I whispered. You're offering control. I typed. This isn't mitigation. It's a test. There was no reply. That silence was intentional. They wanted the last word to sit. I crossed the street against the light and ducked into a small, crowded cafe, the kind that smelled like burnt espresso and damp coats. I paid cash and took a seat near the window, positioning myself where reflection and transparency overlapped. I took out my notebook and wrote Evan's name, then my mother's, then my own. I drew a circle around mine. This was the countermove, not denial, consolidation. They wanted spread. I would concentrate. My phone buzzed again, proceeding with restriction review. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened the PDF again and scrolled slowly, memorizing the formatting, the margins, the font, the way the names were ordered, not alphabetically but by proximity. That was useful. Systems reveal hierarchy when they think they're demonstrating power. I closed the file. I typed one final message. You wanted legibility. Now I'm reading you. When it came, it was the shortest yet. Be careful. That wasn't a system speaking. That was the voice, the person. The escalation had reached a new phase, not force, not silence, but warning. Warnings are admissions. I set the phone down and looked out the cafe window, watching people hurry past with no awareness of the architecture, pressing down invisibly around them. Episode 6 wasn't accelerating anymore. It was narrowing. The system had shown its hand, not fully, but enough to confirm what I'd suspected all along. It couldn't afford witnesses who understood its methods, and now it had created one intentionally, me. The question wasn't whether it would escalate again. It would. The question was whether I could redirect that escalation before the cost landed where it couldn't be undone. I closed my notebook and stood, leaving the cafe without finishing my drink. As I stepped back into the street, one thought anchored itself with chilling clarity. They hadn't called me to stop me. They'd called me to see if I would protect others or sacrifice them to end the pressure, and my answer to that question would determine what kind of force came next. The mistake they made wasn't the call. It was what came after. Systems that rely on pressure assume something fundamental about human behavior. that when you raise the cost, people will retreat towards safety, towards silence, towards smaller lives. They assumed I would try to protect everyone. That assumption gave me leverage. I didn't go home. I didn't call Evan. I didn't respond to the last message. Instead, I changed the geometry. I walked until the city thinned, until storefronts gave way to older buildings with poor lighting and unreliable signals. Places where data lagged behind intention, where systems hesitated before acting. I found a bench near an underpass and sat down, letting the sound of traffic above me smear into a continuous roar. It was loud enough to erase nuance, loud enough to make listening difficult. That mattered. I took out my notebook again. 3 names, mine circled. I stared at that circle for a long time. Then I did something I hadn't done since this began. I drew a line outward, not to Evan, not to my mother, to the system itself. This wasn't about escape anymore. It was about redirection. They wanted me to fold inward, to collapse my behavior back into something manageable. They wanted fewer variables, fewer unpredictable edges. So I gave them exactly one. Me. I pulled my phone out and turned it on, not cautiously, not halfway, fully. If they were watching, I wanted them to watch deliberately. The phone vibrated almost immediately. Unknown sender. We're prepared to resolve this. Resolve. Finality disguised as mercy. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my email and forwarded the PDF. Not to the press, not to Evan, not to anyone obvious. I sent it to an address that hadn't been used in years, a university ethics board mailing list I'd once been added to during a short consulting project, an automated group address with dozens of recipients, most inactive, some retired, a few still teaching, people who understood systems, people who documented things. The email body contained one sentence, received without context, documenting for clarity, no accusation, no narrative, just a time-stamped artifact entering a new environment. That was the countermeasure, not exposure, dispersion. I didn't wait to see if it delivered. I turned my phone face down and stood, heart steady, breath slow. This was the first irreversible move. The phone buzzed again, harder this time. Transmission detected. I smiled faintly. Yes, I whispered. The next message came faster. You've increased exposure beyond acceptable thresholds. Good, I said quietly. I typed, you already defined exposure as risk. I'm redistributing it. The reply came after a pause that felt too long to be automated. This action affects others. There it was again, the same lever. But something had shifted. They weren't warning me now, they were reacting. I typed carefully. Not the controlled silence from before. This one felt unsettled. I started walking again, moving out from under the overpass and back into the city's edge. Streetlights flickered on as evening settled fully. People passed, unaware that the system had just lost exclusivity over one of its artifacts. My phone buzzed. We asked for de-escalation. I stopped walking. You asked for legibility, I said aloud. I typed. This is legible. The response came almost immediately. You're misjudging scope. That was interesting. Scope implies size, reach, containability. I typed back, you're misjudging memory. That message stayed unread longer than any before. When the reply finally came, it was different. No prefix, no framing, just a sentence. You forced a review. My pulse quickened, not with fear, but with confirmation. Review meant process. Process meant delay. Delay meant space. I leaned against a brick wall and let myself breathe for a moment, grounding in the rough texture beneath my fingertips. The city felt suddenly closer, louder, more alive. They couldn't unsend what I'd sent. They couldn't retrieve it without creating more artifacts, and artifacts accumulate. My phone buzzed again. Further dissemination will trigger containment. I laughed softly. You're already past that, I murmured. I typed one final message. Containment assumes singular custody. You lost that. The reply didn't come right away. Minutes passed, I checked the time. 10 minutes. Still nothing. That silence was the clearest signal yet. The system wasn't deciding how to punish me. It was deciding how to explain what had already happened. I felt the weight of it settle, not triumph, not relief, but gravity. This was the moment where pressure stopped being theoretical and started leaving traces in the world that couldn't be quietly erased. I thought about Evan again, about my mother, about how the system had tried to turn terror into leverage. This was how I broke that loop, by making myself the only meaningful node, by ensuring that any escalation landed on me first. My phone buzzed one last time. The message was short, careful. We recommend you pause further action. Pause, not stop. Pause meant uncertainty. Pause meant they needed time. I checked my final response of the night. You don't pause momentum, you only fall behind it. The screen stayed dark after that. No acknowledgement, no warning, no correction. I pushed off the wall and walked, letting my pace remain calm, unhurried, indistinguishable from anyone else's. The city absorbed me easily, but something fundamental had changed. For the first time since this began, the system was no longer dictating the rhythm, it was responding to mine. Episode 6 had moved beyond confrontation. The first countermeasure had landed, not loudly, not visibly, but irrevocably. And now the question wasn't whether the system would escalate again. The question was whether it could do so without exposing the architecture it was built on. As I disappeared into the evening crowd, one thought anchored itself with cold certainty. I had forced them into daylight, and systems that survive on shadow do not adapt well when the lights come on. The backlash didn't come for me. That was how I knew I'd hit something vital. If the system had understood the move immediately, it would have tightened around my throat. Restricted access, accelerated containment, a return to the old rhythm of pressure and silence. Instead, the response arrived sideways, clumsy in its precision, sharp in all the wrong places. They aimed at the wrong target. I learned that an hour after the email, not from a message, not from a warning, from absence. I checked my phone and saw 3 missed calls from Evan. That alone told me enough. He didn't call repeatedly unless something was wrong. He preferred asynchronous communication, clean lines, documented trails. Calls were for emergencies or moments when systems behaved unpredictably. I didn't call him back immediately. That hesitation mattered. If the system was misfiring, I needed to understand where the pressure was landing before I moved. Another missed call came through, then a text. Something's off. My access just changed. That was the phrase. Changed. Not cut, not revoked. Reassigned. I closed my eyes and felt a familiar surge of anger. Hotter this time, edged with guilt. This was the cost I'd anticipated, the one I'd tried to redirect toward myself. The system had adjusted, but not cleanly. Containment rarely is. I typed back, "Don't troubleshoot yet. Tell me exactly what changed." The reply came almost immediately. "Credentials still valid, but scope is narrower. Logs are missing. Audit flags where there weren't any before." I exhaled slowly. They hadn't silenced him. They'd constrained his view. That was worse. Restricting perception is safer than removing agency. It looks like a technical issue, a misconfiguration, something that can be blamed on maintenance or updates. The system was trying to fold Evan back into noise, and in doing so, it revealed the flaw. They assumed he was the lever. They thought proximity equaled causation. I typed carefully. "They're not targeting you because of what you know. They're targeting you because of what you see." There was a pause. Then, "That tracks. They're forcing me to operate blind." I leaned against the wall of a quiet alley, the city's hum flattening into a steady background roar. This was the misfire. Pressure applied to a node that wasn't designed to absorb it. Systems love leverage, but they hate nuance. By moving sideways, they created friction they couldn't easily explain. My phone buzzed again. Unknown sender. "We're addressing unintended impact." Unintended. I smiled grimly. "You always say that when it's too late," I whispered. I typed, "You're constraining the wrong variable." The response came faster than expected. "Your actions expanded the field." There it was. Admission. Not of fault, but of surprise. I typed again. "Expansion changes attribution." No reply. I walked, letting my steps fall into the rhythm of traffic lights and crosswalks. The city felt different now. Not watched, but reactive. Like a surface that rippled after a stone had already sunk. Evan called again. This time I answered. "Hey," he said. His voice was calm, but I could hear the edge beneath it, the professional alertness that surfaced when something didn't align with expectation. "They narrowed your scope," I said. "Yes," he replied, "and they did it sloppily." "Tell me." "They flagged my account for review without isolating dependencies," he said. "That means other systems are noticing, quietly." I smiled despite myself. "That's bad for them." "Yes," he agreed, "it is." We both knew what that meant. Systems are territorial. They don't like interference from adjacent layers, especially not without explanation. The misfire wasn't just ethical, it was structural. "They think you're the catalyst," Evan said. "They're wrong." "Good," I said. "Let them keep thinking that." "Daniel," he said, and my name sounded heavier now, more grounded. "They're making this visible to people who don't like surprises." "I know," I replied. "That's the point. Silence on the line. Not disconnection, but recalibration." "They'll correct," Evan said finally. "Hard." "Yes," I said, "but not accurately." We ended the call without saying goodbye. There was nothing left to clarify. My phone buzzed again. Unknown sender. Containment protocols adjusted. Adjusted, not escalated, not enforced. That word told me everything. They were scrambling. I typed one sentence. "You're compensating for a misfire." The reply came slower now, language tightening. "We're restoring balance." Balance is what systems claim when control slips. I walked into a grocery store and wandered the aisles without intent, letting the fluorescent lights flatten everything into sameness. I paid cash for a bottle of water and stepped back outside, my thoughts moving faster now, sharper. The misfire had created two problems for them. First, they'd applied pressure to a secondary node without isolating the primary one. Second, they'd done it visibly enough that internal systems would begin asking questions, not about me, but about why that node was touched at all. Curiosity is dangerous, especially inside hierarchies. My phone buzzed again. "We need to realign focus." That sentence was the tell. They were trying to pull the frame back around me. "Too late." I typed. "You already taught me how you move. Now others are noticing the pattern." The reply didn't come. I walked until dusk thickened into evening, the city lights blinking on in uneven clusters. I felt the pressure shift again, this time not narrowing but diffusing. The system was trying to undo its own move without acknowledging it. That's when I knew the countermeasure had worked, not because they'd stopped, but because they'd lost confidence in where to apply force. Evan texted again. They widened my scope back, not fully, but enough. Restorative gestures are confessions. They don't erase what happened, they mark it. I typed back, "Document everything." His reply came with a single word, "Already." I stood on a bridge and watched the river carry reflections downstream, broken into fragments by the current. That image felt right. This was the phase where systems made mistakes, not from malice, but from haste. When pressure met uncertainty, and correction chased consequence, the misfire had done more than protect Evan. It had exposed the system's internal seams. And seams, once visible, invite pulling. My phone buzzed one last time. "Unknown sender. This instability is unsustainable." I smiled softly. "Instability," I whispered, "is just truth moving faster than control." I typed my final message of the night. "Then stop aiming where it's easiest. Start aiming where it's accurate." The screen stayed dark. No response, no warning, no reassurance. I walked home under a sky just beginning to cloud over, the air thick with the promise of rain. The city felt quieter now, not calmer, but uncertain. Episode 6 had reached a critical bend. The system had struck, and missed, and misses leave marks. The next escalation wouldn't be indirect, it wouldn't be cautious, it would be desperate. Because once a system starts correcting its own mistakes in public, it's no longer in control of the narrative, and narratives once lost don't come back quietly. The system didn't respond right away. That was the final warning. After the misfire, after the quiet reversals and half corrections, silence returned. But this time it wasn't strategic, it wasn't patient, it wasn't measured, it was heavy, like the pause before something breaks. I felt it as I walked home, the air thick with something unnamed, the city holding its breath without knowing why. Streetlights flickered on earlier than usual, casting uneven shadows that stretched too far across the pavement. Cars passed slower. Conversations drifted, then cut off abruptly. People sense pressure even when they don't understand its source. By the time I reached my building, my phone was still silent. No messages, no alerts, no reminders pretending to be helpful. That meant the system was done adjusting. It had chosen. Inside my apartment, I didn't turn on the lights. I stood in the doorway for a moment, listening to the building settle, the familiar creaks and distant sounds grounding me in something real. I placed my keys on the table, lined them up carefully, and sat down, waiting again. But this time waiting wasn't a tactic. It was inevitability. The phone vibrated at last. Not a buzz, not a ring. A notification tone I didn't recognize. I picked it up slowly. Unknown sender. One message. We can no longer allow uncontrolled propagation. I read it twice. Allow, not manage, not mitigate. Allow. They weren't framing this as correction anymore. They were asserting authority. I typed nothing. Another message followed. You have two options. There it was. The structure every system falls back on when nuance fails. False binaries. I waited. Option 1. You disengage fully. I almost laughed. Disengage, as if there were an outside to step into. You cease contact with restricted individuals. You accept stabilized access. This concludes the matter. Stabilized access. A life returned to me in pieces, conditional and monitored. A quiet ending. The phone vibrated again. Option 2. We proceed with enforcement. No explanation, no detail. Just a word heavy enough to carry everything they didn't want to say. Enforcement meant consequences that didn't need justification. It meant pressure that didn't need to look reasonable. It meant someone else paying the cost before I did. My hands were steady as I held the phone. That surprised me. I'd imagined this moment would feel sharper, fear cutting through resolve, doubt flooding in all at once. Instead, what I felt was clarity. This was the choice my father had faced. Not in words, not in messages, but in shape. Disappear into safety and let the system remain invisible, or stay visible and become the boundary. I thought about Evan, about the way his voice had changed once he realized the system was clumsy under pressure, about how quickly he'd understood what was happening, not because he'd seen this exact thing before, but because he recognized the logic beneath it. I thought about my mother, about her silences, about the way she'd learned to live inside half-truths without letting them hollow her out completely, about the cost she'd paid so quietly I hadn't known to name it. The system had learned from them. Now it wanted me to choose differently. My phone vibrated again. Failure to choose will be interpreted as non-compliance. I closed my eyes. This was the last manipulation. Choice framed as urgency. Urgency framed as consent. I typed slowly, deliberately. Your options assume I value stability over integrity. The response didn't come immediately. I imagined the layers above the voice I'd spoken to, the analysts, the supervisors, the committees that existed to make decisions feel distributed enough to be blameless. When the reply came, it was shorter. Integrity is subjective. I smiled faintly. That's your mistake, I whispered. I typed back. No, integrity is contextual, and you've defined the context. There was a long pause, long enough for me to stand and walk to the window, to look out at the city lights blinking like distant signals, long enough for me to feel the weight of the decision settle, not as pressure, but as alignment. This wasn't about winning. It wasn't about exposing everything or tearing the system down. It was about refusing to let it decide what mattered. The phone buzzed again. Enforcement will impact others. There it was, the last lever. I turned away from the window and sat back down, phone warm in my hand. You already tried that, I said quietly. I typed. You misfired, and you revealed who you aim at when you're uncertain. The reply came after a pause that felt like calculation under stress. We will correct. That word again, correction. I shook my head. No, I murmured. You'll repeat. I typed one final message. Here's my choice. I stopped. This was the moment. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just irreversible. I finished typing. I disengaged from your framework, not from the people you threaten, from you. The phone stayed silent. Seconds passed, then minutes. I expected something, an immediate escalation, A flood of messages, a hard cut to access. None of that came. Instead, the phone vibrated once more. A final message, then understand this. I waited. Visibility will no longer protect you. I read it carefully. They were telling the truth now. Visibility had been leverage. Now it would be risk. I typed my last response. It never did. The screen went dark, not dimmed, dark. The phone powered off on its own. I stared at it for a long moment, then placed it face down on the table. The silence that followed was different from any before it. Not observation, not restraint, withdrawal. They hadn't conceded. They'd repositioned. This wasn't the end of pressure. It was the end of negotiation. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes, letting the exhaustion finally surface. My body ached with it. My thoughts slowed, not because the danger had passed, but because the shape of it had changed. Episode 6 had reached its breaking point. The choice had been made, not between safety and danger, between control and responsibility. As the city hummed outside, indifferent and alive, one last realization settled into place. The system would come back, but next time it wouldn't ask, and neither would I.